Okay, talking about our governor here. So we talked about overspeed, on-speed, underspeed, and which way the oil is routed through it, as you can see very clearly through all like that. But we didn't talk about the speed sensing mechanism up here. So right up here we have flyweights, and they're hinged right there in the middle. So I do this a lot when I talk about flyweights. And I have a governor right here, and you can see little flyweights in there. They flap back and forth. Want me to pass this around? Yeah. It's sharp. Don't cut yourself. I don't feel like doing the inside report. This kind of looks like rubber. That's the flyweight. All right, so there's flyweights up there and a speeder spring. So right now this is shown in the on-speed condition, which is the flyweights have mass and they spin around. Oops, hang on a minute. They spin around, so centrifugal force tends to make them do this. And this part right here lifts up the pilot valve. And there's a spring on the top, and so the spring brings them back to equilibrium. So when it's on speed, the centrifugal force matches the spring pressure. But if the spring pressure gets too much because it starts slowing down, it will do this, dropping the pilot valve. So overspeed would look like this, right? Flyweights went out, on speed, and underspeed. Oh, that didn't work out well. Drops it down. And this part right here just raises and lowers the pilot valve. And that's all there is to this thing. So what the pilot is controlling in the cockpit is really just the pressure on the spring. So there's like a, I'll go back to this picture here. Like right here, you can look at this one right here, top right. So when it moves, you can actually see it go in and out. It's like on a big screw, it goes in and out as you move it. And that's all that, so you can see that happening. And then this one right here, it's a rack and pinion. We'll talk about that. It just runs has gears that go this way and a rack that goes up and down with those gears. Pushes pressure down on the spring. And this one over here does the same thing as I think the first one does, but it does it electrically. Just moves that arm. So that's all there is to it.
So the glue now is connected to the spring?
It's connected to the arm that puts pressure on the spring or releases pressure on the spring. ENT components. Basic components. Well, what were my basic components? We have a booster gear pump. A booster gear pump. So we have a governor. Takes engine oil and boosts the pressure to, I think these numbers are low. I think,
you said something like 350?
yeah, I think these, well, 275 is pretty close, wouldn't you say? About 75 psi off?
It's actually 75 psi off.
So it's, I just said that, it's 75. Thank you. So, yeah. So it's going to depend on the engine. But I can't tell this, I can't write this without remembering a story that is just a painful one for me. And I forget what air, it's Cessna 190. There's like this 190 and the 195, which you've probably never heard about. They're tail-wheeled airplanes. They're cool looking. They're cantilever wing, which means there's no strut, and have a big radial engine on the front. And like one of them had the Jacobs engine. One of them had a 240 horsepower Continental radial, which are extremely rare. I've only really seen like one of these, and it's this one. And so we overhauled it. It's, I don't want to bore you with the story. It's a terrible thing. The guy, who's a jerk anyway, he was flying along and he said he heard an explosion. He said, I literally saw the prop stop and then it went. And so it had a big crack in the case. And then my company not me, said, oh yeah, we can send this out. We can have the case weld repaired. We can get this going. We can fix it up for you, blah, blah, blah. And that's old metal. It is just old metal that is already cracked. It's fatigued. We should have never have agreed to do it, but we agreed. I didn't agree, but I got stuck doing this engine. And so I got the engine all done, and I did. I made a mistake, and I left the plug out in an oil gallery, which caused not enough oil to go to the top end, but I caught it right after we did it, so it didn't do any damage, but I had to, do the right thing. I took off all the cylinders, inspected them, and it was still fresh grease everywhere, so it was totally fine. So put it all back together, the top end, and what happened? When I got done with the engine the first time, we had finished everything but the prop governor. And this particular engine has these, you have to get the engine oil from the governor to the front of the crankshaft. So I'm going to show you how that's done in a few slides here. So it's got a transfer collar. Well, this particular engine had this bizarre, it had like piston rings. They're about that big around, and there was a whole stack of them. And there was, I forget, like a dozen or so of these rings. And the oil went in, and then in the middle of it, and these rings wrapped around the crankshaft in such a way that it allowed the high pressure oil to go through these and out. So anyway, we didn't have the governor done, but everybody was in such a freaking hurry. So we trucked off the engine back to the customer, and he's like, I'll deal with my governor myself. And when I built the engine, I was so worried about these rings, and I called all these places, and like, they're unavailable. They're absolutely none left in the world. If you have a bad ring, you're just done. He said, so be very, very careful. Take them off very gently. Put them aside. Put them back on. Don't do anything with them. Don't even look at them too long. You'll overheat them by looking at them or warp them. I made that part up. So so he set the engine. I don't know, they put the prop on wrong, and they started it up, and it flung oil all over his airplane. And so I had to go down there and like, you screwed up this engine. You didn't put the nose seal in right. And I'm like, oh, there's no nose seal in this airplane. But so I drove all the way down there, and I'm like, you just totally cleaned the airplane. I forget what I did. I said, well, I guess I got to see what's going on. So did something. I don't remember. It's been so long, but they started it back up again. And oh my God, it just dumped a gallon of oil all over this airplane and slung it out the prop, which is funny in retrospect. But anyway, it just turned out to put the prop on wrong. So I drove all the way down there and put the prop on. And so everything is fine. And so he's flying it. And it developed another crack in the case. I'm like, nothing we could, it's just this old metal. And so he, instead of bringing it back to us, I think he got in a fight with my boss or something over it. I wasn't involved. But anyway, the point I'm getting to is, he paid some mechanic to take it apart to find what was, like just to prove that we didn't do it right. But when they got to these oil transfer rings, they were as thin as a piece of paper. I mean, they were literally razor blades. There was nothing left to them. And so turned out the prop shop that he sent his governor to set the boost pressure up as high as it would go. And so when I called around, hey, this is what happened to the rings, what happened? The guy's like, oh, that's a simple one. You can't set the governor pressure on that thing like over 125 PSI. It'll wipe out the rings. And it was set at like 350 or something. So yeah, I just ate him up. It was his fault for
having that engine.
For not having a prop shop, I guess. I don't want to blame on the prop shop. They probably followed their data for that particular prop governor. But because it was on an antique engine, things changed. But anyway, so yeah, I guess it matters what your prop pressure is at, so gotta be careful with that. Okay, I don't know. I hope you enjoyed that story. That story goes on and on. It gets worse and worse and worse. I'm not even going to get into it. So, the pump. What kind of pump is it?
A gear type pump. Constant displacement.
Constant displacement gear type pump. Gear type pump. What drives it? It is directly connected to the engine. Directly connected to engine gears. And that's very important. Very important. Why is that very important?
Depending on engine speed.
What's that?
Depending on engine speed.
Yes, this whole thing is dependent on engine speed. It's like the Continental fuel injection. Got to tie it to the engine. You can't have it turning on its own. It's got to sense this. Where is it connected? Well, some engines put it in the back off the accessory case. Some of them run it up front. I think it's better to run it up front because it's where the prop is. The Lycomings that run in the back, they've had ADs on the oil lines that go forward braking. And when an oil line breaks that's connected to a governor at 250 PSI, you lose your oil pretty dang fast. So, let's just see if I got this here. Oh, there's my pretty pictures. This is in. All you have to do is read the bottom. Under speed. On speed. And the pilot control only varies the spring pressure. That's what I wanted to show you. This is a big bore Continental. That's a transfer collar right there. Right there is the transfer collar. That's all it looks like. Sits down in there. Oops. It's got a little pipe. It's a very tiny little pipe with an O-ring on it that sits in here and sits inside the case. So it looks just like a bearing right there, but that's all it is. So high pressure oil is going to come up through the case into the oil transfer collar that is just wrapped around the shaft and spinning inside the shaft. And let's see. High pressure oil is going to go inside this annulus right there. Pressurize inside the crankshaft. There's a hole in the crankshaft that corresponds to this right here. That's whole spinning around, but because it's encased in a transfer collar that has high pressure oil lined up with the hole in the crankcase, crankshaft, that will then force the high pressure oil inside the middle of the crankshaft, which will then force high pressure oil to come out the nose. So that's how Continental does it. Lycoming's a little different. You guys had the very rare, this is a recycled picture, you should have seen it already, where I see all the things that are wrong with it now. But you had one that used a bearing right here. You had 4 bearings up front. Remember? This only uses 2 bearings. The split is along the half right here. There's the split. If I zoomed in, you'd see it. And the oil comes in right here, aligns with that hole, and so then up into the nose. So it's just half the bearing is high pressure and the other half is low pressure. So the high pressure does bleed out. No matter what system you have, that high pressure bleeds out. So I don't really believe that there's this like on-speed condition where you just block oil off into the prop and you hydraulic lock the prop and it's just going to be fine right there. So number one, I don't think that ever happens because the oil, the prop is fighting against it, either trying to go to high or low pitch, depending on your mechanism, and it's going to be fighting it and pushing oil back out through the transfer collar. It's going to bleed out, right? So number one, oil is going to bleed out because of that. Number two, you're never perfectly still in an airplane. There's always some fluctuation. So I think those flyweights are just constantly moving back and forth. What's wrong with this picture? What's the most obvious thing?
Silk string.
What silk string? Those are shoelaces that they laid in there. Love to know how that worked out for them. Oh, I do have a little video. All right.
Well, they just torqued it down enough until it became...
That's right. Just more pressure. Okay. Booster gear pump. We have the pressure relief valve. A pressure relief valve allows excessive pressure. I don't like the way this one says it. To be returned to the inlet side of, what's that?
Unused pressure or oil?
Yeah. See, I don't really like that because it's allows excessive pressure. Well, you define excessive pressure. Well, it does more than that. One, it does set the pressure. So it sets sets max pressure. Provides a bypass. What would happen if the pressure was too much?
Blow past the pilot path.
Start blowing seals out of your prop, I would imagine. So,
Maybe.
yeah, I think blowing it out of the transfer collar would not be a problem, but it could cause a leak up there.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right, we have our pressure relief, provides a bypass. C, flyweights. Flyweights. Connected to the drive shaft of the governor. Hey, here's a fun question. How do you determine the rotation of the drive of a governor?
I have no idea.
I know you don't.
That is a question.
Oh, seriously? You guys are all going to be quiet on this one?
No, you have to look at the oil pump.
No.
You know, the holes. With
That's not what I meant. I wasn't even trying to get that like in depth.
It's directly from the drive.
If somebody says this is a clockwise turning pump,
From the drive.
clockwise from the...
Drive.
Jeez. Do you want this
That's all
back?
you wanted to hear?
Yes.
Sometimes
I miss
sometimes
the
it's like,
question.
yeah,
I was giving everybody else a chance to get involved.
It's sad when I put this on the test and yet I see, oh, 3 people missed this one. Cooper and 2 other people.
Hey. I just did it 3 times.
Flyweights connected to the governor drive shaft. Why are they connected to the drive shaft of the governor? Because
You said
RPM.
they sense the RPM. They are...
Who's they?
Sir, I am they.
You are
They,
they. Yeah, they suction. You are they.
the flyweights, are L-shaped. As governor, or engine, speeds up, centrifugal force, moves the flyweights out, or outward, which lifts the pilot. Lifts the pilot valve. That's good. The opposite is true as governor. I'm just going to put gov. Save time. Slows down. Loss of centrifugal force. Moves flyweights in. Moves the fly in, lowering pilot valve. And lastly, if governor is on speed, flyweights and spring are in equilibrium. There we go. Then we have the pilot valve.
Forced a little pilot to go in.
That's right, little tiny guy. Moves up and down, depending on how the thing is mounted. Mine is mounted sideways, so technically it moves in right and left on my airplane. and most airplanes. Moves up and down to one of three positions. Are you taking a nap, Coop?
Yeah, I just get so tired sometimes.
You're putting me to sleep, Kev. Three positions. I have open passages to send oil to prop. Open passages to drain oil from prop. And 3, block all passages. Which is no oil movement to or from the prop. Oil route. Let me see. Do I want to write all this? Accessory case pad mounted governor uses an external line to the front of the crankcase. Crankcase mounted governor has no external lines. Oil is directed through the case to a passage in the front main bearing. Oil hole in the crankshaft matches with an oil slot in the main bearing. Oil is transferred through the crankshaft out in front of the propeller. I don't think I need to write that, do I? Oil route. From governor to crankcase to oil transfer, collar, to inside of crank to prop. So we'll talk about the props.
No.
Baseball collar. So there's a piston right up in here. So the oil will come up, turn around, and press on the little piston. Piston. Let's see.
You are really getting into it.
We're tired.
I don't blame you.
All right, then we got the speeder spring.
That speeder spring been going too fast, tell you what. Let's get pulled over.
Got it. Took me a second. All right. I had to work for it, but I got it. All right.
Officer, it was the flyweights.
It's that damn blue knob. Gotta stay off that.
Speeder spring applies pressure to flyweights. Well, without the speeder spring, what would the flyweights do? Just boom. They would do nothing, yeah. Always saying overspeed, overspeed, overspeed.
So if you want to speed up the airplane, you just take your speed.
Yeah. So let me see. Speeder spring allows flyweights to move outward at proper RPM. So allows pilot control. So more compression equals what? So if I put more pressure on the speeder spring, what's flyweight going to do? It's going to go that way, which is underspeed, which means
Low pitch.
underspeed, which equals what should the prop do?
draining oil from the proper.
Less plating.
Speed up.
Yep,
Yeah, speed the prop up, draining oil from it.
speed up. Less
I feel
compression.
like they should have done that the other way around.
Yeah, you know, just totally.
Under speed means speed up instead of.
Yeah, no, under speed. Like the condition is under speed. You need to speed it up.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm picking up what
I
you're
feel like
putting
these
down.
words follow the physics,
Yeah.
Pick it up.
but
What do you know about physics? You speak
not. Yeah.
Actually, physics based.
Ankle wrist thing. What's it called? What are your body called? Foot wrist.
Wow, I wish you
Foot wrist. No, that's good enough.
Oh,
All
this
right.
looks real.
Oh, yeah.
Did you record this?
All right, this is probably take number 25 here. All right, so what I want to do is so much of what we're talking about here, propellers and engine RPM, manifold pressure, and operation of an aircraft would be so much easier if I could take everybody up flying and you could experience it and play with the controls. But that becomes a little difficult with a lot of students and the cost and expense of taking you offline. So we are going to use X-Plane here, and we're going to use the Baron here, the Beech Baron 58. And this is appears to be a normally aspirated, fuel-injected engines on this particular aircraft, and we are going to go for a flight. So, all right, change my screen here, take us back inside the cockpit. Back inside the cockpit. Hey, there we go. Okay, so what we want to do first thing is, hey, there's an airplane right there. We got to get this thing started. So to start a fuel-injected engine, first we'd bring up the battery, and I just usually turn on my alternators while I'm there so I don't end up forgetting, is we would bring up, we'll start the left engine first. We're going to bring up the mixture, bring up a little bit of fuel here. We only need that one forward. And we're going to watch the fuel flow right there. So watching the fuel flow, I'm going to bring up the boost pump. And we get a little fuel flow. Once we get fuel flow showing, then we can bring it over here, hit the start. Engine goes ahead and starts for us. All right, bring that back to idle. So we're idling the left engine. Now the nice thing about X-Plane, honestly, is you can cheat a little bit. You don't need to do all that. You can just go ahead and click the starter. Once you bring in the mixture. So you can cheat, but you can't cheat that much. All right, so we've got both engines now up and running. We'll bring up our avionics master. We are lined up at McClellan on runway 16, if I'm not mistaken. There we go. There's our control tower over there, and there's the big building right outside of our hangar. And I guess we can look, well, so if we look a little bit left, we'd see our hangar. You'd be mad at me if I didn't do it. So let me see. Can I look left? There we go. You can't really tell. But we're over there, right? Okay, so here we are lined up on the runway. And what I want to do here, because that's really not so much a flight demo, is I want to kind of get this thing going in autopilot. So we're going to take the cursor, bring the cursor around to runway heading so that we can just take off and use the autopilot to do most of what I need to do here. All right. Well, like any good pilot, we'd want to do a run up, wouldn't we? So back up here so we can look at the controls and our gauges all at the same time. So we have manifold pressure up top, RPM, fuel flow, CHT, EGT, oil temp, oil pressure, and we have the brakes on. So we're going to bring up one engine. We'll bring up the left side, give it to about 1700 RPM. 1700, and we do a mag check. So we can watch the RPM is going to drop, and our EGT should go up a little bit, so we'll check it out. I got a little bit of a drop, and maybe a little bit of EGT. So we'll go back to both. Then do left. Runs good on the left. Runs good on the right. Back to both. And bring that back down. Bring this one up to 1700. Touchy throttles there. And do the same thing. Left, back to both, right, back to both. And what I didn't do last time, and I should have done, is we will do a propeller cycle. Now this thing is very sensitive, so as we pull this back, whoosh, we get a big propeller cycle there. I wouldn't really do that in a real airplane, but let's, I wouldn't do this in an airplane either, but here we're going to see what happens here. So I got both engines back to idle. Now let's bring them both up to, let's go wide open throttle, and we're on the brakes. And you will notice that our manifold pressure comes just about 1 inch below our current, so 29.92, 30, so about an inch below. That's about 2 inches below. We can see that both of the RPMs have hit red line, which they're supposed to do. Let me zoom in a little bit on the stuff. So right at red line, a little bit low. I won't probably want to consider adjusting that, but we'll see what happens when we release the brakes. Fuel flow, oh, that's a lot of gallons per hour. And we can see our CHT, EGTs, oil temp is going up, oil pressure is at the top of the green. So we wouldn't normally do this on a pre-run, just sit here and run both engines wide open throttle, but wanted you to see what's happening right there. All right, so we'll pull these back to idle, and we are ready for takeoff. So notice again, manifold pressure at idle. We have a significant suction at idle. We are idling at about 900 RPM. Fuel flow is less than 5 gallons per hour. CHTs are down below 150, oil temp around 80. So as we bring up the throttle and release the brakes, let's see what happens. So we're going to go wide open here. And I kind of have to look out the window as I'm doing this. We'll see what happens. Release the brakes. Start the roll. And we can see they're right up to red line. Looking over here at my airspeed, time to pull up. And get the gear up. Gears up. And like I said, I don't really want to sit here and fly this as we're talking. So what I'm going to do is come down here, turn on my autopilot, and go to heading mode. Autopilot lit up right there. Go to heading mode. Heading mode, so it's going to follow that little bug right there. And we're climbing about 2,000 feet per minute. So I can let go of the yoke over here. And we're looking pretty good. So, all right. So note that, oops, we're kind of getting carried away here on our, there we go. Climbing nice. Note that our manifold pressure is going to start dropping. It's going to start dropping simply because we're going up in altitude and we just don't have the atmosphere that we had a little bit more. That didn't make sense, sorry. We're going to have the manifold pressure is going to be dropping because we don't have the same outside air pressure. As we go up, air pressure is going to decrease, obviously, and it's going to also show it right here at the same time. Now you'll see that the props are in fact out of sync, even though I have them both forward. Well, that one was back just a little bit. There we go. All right, and we can turn on the prop sync. Well, let's get them out of sync just a little tiny bit. See if the prop sync on this thing works. So propeller sync. One act the governor to adjust, and look at that. Right there shows us that both propellers are in fact going at the same speed. So there we go. We're climbing out. We're at 2,900. We're doing about a little over 1,500 feet per minute. We are doing 120 knots. And we're seeing our manifold pressure go down, down, down. And that's fine. It's what it's supposed to do. So normally after a climb out in my particular plane, I'd back off on the manifold pressure a little bit, but hey, this is a rented airplane, so we can just keep flogging it here. So we're going to get up here, I think about 4,000 feet is going to be just fine for what we need to do. So let's go hit our altitude hold right here. It's going to oscillate quite a bit, so I should probably kind of bring it in, help it out a little bit. All right, so we've leveled off here right about 6,300. Still going to do some of its oscillations because I got everything wide open. But once we've reached our cruising altitude, we're going to pull back on our throttles, and we're going to see that the RPM is going to stay right here at red line, and the manifold pressure is actually the thing that I'm going to move because throttles are going to control that. So we'll bring this back to about 20 inches just for the heck of it. So we're at about 20.5, 21 inches. And now notice, like I said, the RPM is going to stay right where it is. Well, the RPM is staying there because the propellers flatten out as I pull back the manifold pressure. Now, if I continue to do it and pull back the throttles, pull back the throttles, pull back the throttles, pull back the throttles, at some point, the prop is going to go all the way to its low pitch stop if they program this right. And it just simply can't keep that RPM. Well, this particular programming, there we go, just a little bit delayed. So now you can see that it won't do that. But we'll bring this back up to 20 inches. So like I said, at some point, you bring the throttles back, the prop goes all the way to flat, and then you just can't keep up. So you're going to start losing RPM. It can only do it so much. All right, so right there we've got about 21 inches, and let's see if we can pull the props back right here. Here goes the green knobs. We're pulling them back, pulling them back. We're going to pull that back to an RPM of about 21 inches. Now notice my manifold is actually going up as I'm doing that. It's slowing the engine down. It's giving cylinders more time to fill up, which means the manifold pressure is going up. So I'd have to pull back my manifold just a little bit more. Back to 21. So there we go. So we're about 20 and a half, 20 and a half. So 20 and a half here, 20 and a half there. And we're flying along right here at 15 gallons per hour. But given that we're at 6,400, we can certainly try leaning it out a little bit. We'll tell you what, we'll lean out the left to begin with. So let's watch our EGT right here and see what happens. So as we pull this back, we're going to be extracting more and more work energy out of the mixture, and it should, I'm sorry, we're looking at this one over here, should be going up, 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 and we're going to look for peak. Normally I do this a little bit slower. There we go. Peak EG just happens to be, they programmed at the top of that. Now we're going back the other way, so we can go back up a little bit. Let's find peak. So peak is right there, just happens to be at the top of the arc just because of the way they programmed it that way. And now we're flying along at peak EGT, and we can either enrich in it and go 50, 75 degrees rich at peak right there. I've enriched it, or we can go back to peak. I'm going to pull it back to peak. And oops, went too far. So go peak. Let's try back to peak, back to peak. Oops, that was the wrong button to push. All right, mixture's full. Let's pull it back to peak. Right about there. So we're at peak. I think overshot it just a little bit peak. So we can either go forward to go 50 degrees rich of peak, or backwards and go lean of peak. So let's take this one and we'll go lean of peak and see what happens. We'll go lean of peak. Pull it back a little bit. A little bit. There we go. Now it's starting to drop. So now we went down. If each one is 25, it went down 25 or 50 degrees lean of peak. Now we do the same thing on the right engine. We can pull it back. If we can find peak. Peak is right about there. Now notice the difference in fuel flow. So this one's 8 gallons per hour, and this one over here is 10 gallons per hour at peak. So we can go rich of peak, which would be going forward on this one. So we have the left engine at lean of peak, the right engine rich of peak. Both of them are 50 degrees cool, so 50 degrees lean of peak, 50 degrees rich of peak, and you can see the difference in fuel flow. This one is at 13 gallons per hour, and that one is at 8 gallons per hour. Well, this engine over here is actually producing quite a bit more. I'm sorry, this engine here is producing, the right side be producing more power. I pretty much guarantee that one. Well, number one, we have a split in our manifold pressure. You can see that. So yeah, more power. So we'll bring this one back up to match. Bring it back up to peak. And bring it right back in. There we go. So now we're running them both about over 13 gallons per hour. Manifold pressures are matched. RPMs are matched. Our indicator right here shows that we have a matched engine RPM and propeller RPM. All right, so there we go. So that's how it works. Now, just to play around a little bit with things, again, if I start pulling back or playing with the throttles, I'll do both at the same time. If I put the throttles forward, RPM is going to stay the same. Manifold pressure is going to go up, going up a little bit. And if I pull back, we are going to start losing manifold pressure. So if we look up here, we can see the manifold pressure. Forward, get more manifold pressure, pull it back, less manifold pressure, but our RPM stays locked on target because the blue knobs control the RPM. So we can go back to 20, whatever, get 21.